High in the coast mountains of southeast Alaska, a vast valley is filled to the brim with snow and ice. This dazzling Ice Age world is the Juneau Icefield. It spans more than 1,500 square miles, an area of perpetual winter, larger than the state of Rhode Island. The Juneau Icefield extends 100 miles north to south, with glaciers reaching their icy fingers within Alaska and Canada. It is the 5th largest ice field in North America. The mountain peaks here rise to elevations over 8,000 feet. These peaks are called nunataks. 20,000 years ago, nunataks were the only landforms in southeast Alaska to rise above the massive ice fields, which were 4,000 to 5,000 feet thick. As the climate warmed, the glaciers retreated, leaving behind the deep water fjords that characterize so much of southeast Alaska. Today, the mountains, which are the backbone of the Inside Passage, block moisture-laden clouds that roll in from the North Pacific. At sea level, this moisture falls mostly as rain, bathing the emerald forests. When it's raining in the forest at the higher elevations, it snows, often exceeding 100 feet of new snow every year in the Juneau Icefield, replenishing more than 36 glaciers. The most famous of all glaciers emanating from the Juneau Icefield is the Mendenhall Glacier. It flows 12 miles down the valley, ending in silt-filled Mendenhall Lake. At its widest point, the glacier stretches 1.5 miles across the valley. It's not the largest of Alaska's 100,000 glaciers, but because you can drive up to it or land on it aboard a helicopter, it has become one of Alaska's most visited attractions. Every summer, hundreds of thousands of visitors come to see Mendenhall Glacier. For many, it's the first time to stare face to face with a mighty river of ice. While some are content to gaze at this icy giant, others actually take guided tours and walk on the glacier, or take guided glacier treks. It's an experience they'll not soon forget. It's like going back in time to the last ice age, when glaciers ruled the landscape. The Mendenhall Glacier Recreation Area is part of the Tongass National Forest, the largest national forest in the United States. The Tongass encompasses nearly all of southeast Alaska. It is an area filled with breathtaking natural beauty, a land which defines grandeur. The Tongass offers a wide variety of recreational and economic opportunities. It is a mecca for sport fishermen. Salmon fishing is the most popular, whether in saltwater or a fly-in trip to a remote lake. In the spring, the Taku River near Yakutat attracts anglers hoping to catch and release elusive steelhead trout. The Tongass is home to diverse wildlife and ecosystems. During the summer, when salmon are returning to spawn, both brown and black bears can be found along salmon spawning streams. Moose inhabit some of the remote parts of the Tongass, while their smaller cousins, Sitka black-tailed deer, are more prevalent in this coastal rainforest. The waters just offshore are home to a diverse population as well. These are humpback whales. After spending the winter in their breeding grounds off Hawaii or Mexico, these gentle giants return to Alaska every summer to feed. On a visit to the Mendenhall Glacier recreation area, you might see bright red sockeye salmon spawning in Steep Creek, or a beaver busying about adjacent ponds. Black bears are the most common bear in this area, while the rocky ridges belong to the sure-footed mountain goats. This is the story of the mighty Mendenhall Glacier and the incredible, intimate land of Southeast Alaska. Just as the summer sun is rising over Mount Roberts, a sleek cruise ship makes its way up Gastineau Channel, heading for Juneau. Nearly every day in the summer, visitors by the thousands arrive in Alaska's capital city. They step off the gangplanks into a frontier town steeped in history. Juneau has maintained its gold rush feel with false-fronted buildings lining South Franklin Street. While many of Juneau's attractions can be seen by foot, like the marble-pillared Capitol building, the main natural attraction is 13 miles from downtown. Nestled at the head of a valley by the same name is the Mendenhall Glacier. It's a remnant of a neo-glacial period 3,000 years ago that caused the last major advance of most coastal glaciers in Alaska. Before 1750, the Mendenhall Glacier advanced 2.5 miles down the valley from its present location. As it began its retreat, it left behind giant boulders. Some moss-covered behemoths rest on the hillsides. Others lie on the valley floor, mammoth landscape rocks for Mendenhall Valley neighborhoods. The rocks and boulders that once laid on top of the glacier ring the shore of Mendenhall Lake. The U.S. Forest Service Visitor Center at Mendenhall Glacier was built on land that in the 1930s was still covered by glacial ice. Over the next 70 years, the glacier receded 1 mile and it's currently in recession. While the glacier continues to flow downhill, advancing an average 1.5 feet a day in some places, the melting and calving of ice at its terminus is causing it to shrink. In some years, the shrinking has been dramatic. In the year 2000, the glacier receded 300 feet. With current global warming conditions, Mendenhall recedes an average of 70 to 100 feet per year. The land revealed by the glacier's retreat is soon reclaimed. It starts out small, with mosses and lichens extracting nutrients from the glacier-scarred rock surface, recently sculpted by the glacier. This is the beginning of a new forest. Fireweed is another early colonist. Other homesteaders, such as lupin, soon follow. This decades-long process of plant succession eventually prepares the soil to support the growth of trees. Land once imprisoned by ice may one day support a mature old-growth forest, just as it has throughout much of southeast Alaska. It's still quiet as the rising summer sun begins to paint Mendenhall Glacier with light and shadows. It will soon be busy with tourists, but for now, the locals have the area all to themselves. This pair of spotted sandpipers are strolling the gravel beach along Mendenhall Lake looking for breakfast. In all, more than 300 species of birds frequent southeast Alaska, and many can be seen or heard in the vicinity of Mendenhall Glacier. You might see a majestic bald eagle surveying the land, or a tiny winter wren calling from his forest perch. Harlequin ducks feed underwater, preferring shallow ponds and lakes with depths less than 10 feet. This female harlequin has chosen this glacier-carved pond near the Mendenhall Visitor Center. This is a great blue heron. Well over 3 feet tall with a 6-foot wingspan, the great blue is the largest of herons in North America. Great blue herons may live as long as 17 years. Herons share this Mendenhall ecosystem with one of the hardest working forest residents. This beaver has used his chisel-like front teeth to gnaw down shrubs and trees and dam one of the small streams that flows into Mendenhall Lake. Throughout the day, you might see a beaver swimming in Mendenhall Lake, or feeding nearby on grasses, pond weeds, and bark. Beavers are year-round residents, spending the long summer days with 19 hours of daylight preparing for winter. The clear waters and gravel beds of Steep Creek are spawning grounds for both sockeye and silver salmon. After spending their first year in these waters and 3 to 5 years at sea, the surviving salmon return through the waters of Mendenhall River and Lake to reach their spawning grounds. These are sockeye, also called red salmon. They've navigated their way to the exact stream of their birth to fan gravel beds and spawn. Their life cycle is nearly complete, but they leave behind seeds of a new generation to repeat this natural wonder. Salmon returning to the spawning grounds are just one of the cycles at Mendenhall Glacier.
I got you.
Hey, we're here together.
This is another summer-long ritual. Boatloads and plane loads of travelers from all over the world coming to experience Mendenhall Glacier up close and personal. Naturalist John Muir was among the first tourists to see and write about this glacier, calling it one of the most beautiful of all the coast glaciers. That was in 1879, but the description is just the same today. The Mendenhall Glacier Recreation Area has a variety of recreational, educational, and photo opportunities. The Visitor Center offers a panoramic picture postcard view of Mendenhall Glacier, as well as interpretive displays about glacier dynamics. Throughout the year, Forest Service interpreters are on hand to answer glacier questions. When they can, rangers harvest glacier ice out of the lake.
I know, it's 80 years old. It says right there, 80 and 150 years old.
That is something else. The clarity is, just being able to look through that, that is something.
After years of accumulation and under enormous weight and pressure, the snow crystals are compacted and compressed and reformed into dense glacier ice. This reorganization of snow into ice changes the crystallography, and it's what gives glacier ice its blue color. Glacier ice seen here in an ice cave beneath Mendenhall Glacier is so dense that once light enters it, only the blue wavelength of light is transmitted back. The blue color of ice is best seen on overcast days, or after a piece of ice breaks away or calves from a glacier's face. In places where the ice is exposed to the elements, the full spectrum of light is scattered indiscriminately, and it looks white. A short walk from the paved parking lot to Photo Point brings you within a mile of Mendenhall Glacier. Here you can often feel a cool wind and hear the roar of the cascading waters of Nugget Creek. In season, another sound is the cry of the Arctic tern. These long-distance migrators arrive from southern South America to nest and raise their young along the lake's edge. While most visitors come to see the glacier and experience nature's wonders, these kids have a different idea of a good time at the glacier. The ponds around the Visitor Center are among the few shallow bodies of water in the Juneau area to be warm enough for swimming. From swimming to kayaking to hiking the nature trails, opportunities abound for discovering more about glaciers and the nature of southeast Alaska. One of the most popular ways to experience Mendenhall Glacier and the Juneau Icefield is by helicopter. Several companies offer guided glacier hikes or more advanced glacier trekking, but they all begin the same way: boarding a helicopter near sea level for an exciting glacier adventure. As the Raven flies, it's a relatively short distance from liftoff to the glacier. But in reality, it's an ice age apart. This is Mendenhall Base Camp for one of the helicopter tour companies. In a whirlwind of activity, the helicopters set down and passengers step out onto the glacier.
My name's Kristen. I'm going to be your guide up here today on the ice. So we'll just do a little bit of talking about the glaciers, and then we're going to go for a walk and check out some features here on the ice.
Guide Kristen Dahl has one of the world's most unique summer jobs as a glacier guide.
How'd you get up here?
How did we get up here? They fly us up at about 8 o'clock, well, about 7:30 in the morning actually, and drop us off, and then we're up here all day. Sometimes we're up here about 12 hours a day doing tours. But it's fun. We love it. Well, to give you a little bit of history, well, number one, you've landed on the Mendenhall Glacier. To give you some history, it actually wasn't always named the Mendenhall Glacier. It was originally named the Ock Glacier. When John Muir first came up and saw this back in the late 1800s, he named it after a Tlingit Indian tribe that was down here at Ock Bay, and that's what he named it. But it wasn't that, it didn't last that long. Actually, just a few years later, the U.S. Geological Survey team came along and did some surveying between the United States and Canada, and they set up the U.S.-Canadian border back here in the Icefield. The gentleman who led that entire venture was based back out in D.C., and his name is Thomas C. Mendenhall, and they decided to commemorate something after him, so they named this block of ice Mendenhall Glacier.
Walking on the Mendenhall, you hear the crunch of ice underfoot. These adventures are on top of a moving glacier.
Absolutely gorgeous. Just unreal.
It's unreal, really.
You gotta see it.
See it to believe it.
Yes.
The glacier's movement is imperceptible, but guide Greg Beck, who has spent more than a dozen summers working on the Mendenhall, says change is constant.
It's always different. That's one of the great things about the job. We actually had For 2 days, we had a lake that extended all the way from this waterfall over to this bank over here all along that edge, and it was actually over a half a mile long. And one night, it just drained out, and so it was gone the next day. So it really is changing quite a bit. It's neat.
Nearly everywhere you look, you see or hear running water on the surface of the glacier. In some places, it's just a trickle. In others, rushing streams. By one estimate, the water created from surface melting on Mendenhall Glacier would fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool every minute. Researchers studying the changes in surface elevation say that over a 47-year period between 1948 and 1995, the glacier surface near the terminus of Mendenhall Glacier dropped over 328 feet. The current rate is even more dramatic. At 2 measuring stations on the lower region of the glacier surface is dropping 7.5 to 11 feet per year. You can see the result of this melting. Rocks which fell on top of the glacier now sit on a pedestal. The rock has insulated the ice beneath it, leaving it precariously perched. Within a week or so, the pedestal becomes unstable and the rock will tumble, only to start the process anew. The field of rocks on top of the glacier form what's called a moraine. From giant boulders to smaller debris, these moraines look like dark ribbons running down the middle and sides of glaciers.
What's happening is they're actually carried along on top of the surface of the ice. This is all ice underneath here, but it's carried along much like a conveyor belt. What happens is they actually keep making their way down along the side here, and they actually travel all the way down to the lake at the bottom. It'll take them about another 30 to 40 years for them to actually reach that point, though. So they'll be traveling with the glacier for all that time. A lot of times, though, they'll actually drop into a crevasse and they actually become crushed by the glacier. You can see the color down there at the bottom in the lake, and what that is, it's actually a pulverized granite that gives it the color down at the lake at the bottom there. So, and you can actually see the surface does appear quite dirty on here, and that is all just crushed rock that you're seeing. It's all the granite up here.
Walking on the Mendenhall provides a rich experience that will last in memory for a lifetime. Another more adventurous way of experiencing this glacier is glacier trekking. This intimate small group activity starts with an aerial tour of the glaciers descending from the Juneau Icefield. From this lofty perch, you can see the brilliant azure blue waters of a small lake created by melting snow and ice. After landing on a flat area on Mendenhall Glacier, these travelers are preparing for their first glacier trek. Glacier trekking requires crampons, which are strapped onto hard-shelled mountaineering boots to give added traction on the glacier. Since most of these glacier trekkers haven't used crampons before, the first course of business is a little step-by-step instruction. Trekking with crampons and ice axes adds a new exciting dynamic to seeing Mendenhall Glacier. Not only can you traverse the steeper slopes, trekkers, if they choose, can try their hand at ice climbing. Trekking and walking on top of one of Alaska's glaciers is a unique experience. It fills the senses with wonder and awe.
Not many people commute to an office like this.
Guide Dan Gordon relishes his time on the Mendenhall.
I think it's the tranquility of the area, the peacefulness of being out in an environment like this, the silence, the able to feel a little bit of nature and to see some of the most majestic features to be seen here, which are the glaciers. And that there are features you'll find here in the ice that you won't find anywhere else in any other sort of thing, just because of how dynamic the ice is in itself. And it's just a lot of fun to be able to witness that, be able to witness the way it changes, the way it flows. If you think of this glacier as a frozen river of ice, we're in the rapids of the frozen river here because the glacier's taking a major elevation change. And the difference in movement between the top and the bottom of the glacier is causing the top to break apart. You can imagine, say, a loaf of bread flowing over a hill, the way that the top slices are going to break apart. It's the same thing happening on the glacier here. And then as we look down that way, we'll notice that the crevasses get a lot closer together and come down and press together once again. And that's what we call a compression zone. And from where we're standing to the bottom of this hill here is probably going to only take the ice about 5 years to travel. That the glacier ice does move relatively rapidly, about 400 feet a year on this glacier. Okay, so you see that area over there where the crevasses are formed on the side. The middle of the glacier is flowing down while the sides of the mountains pull back on it. So the glacier is literally ripping apart on itself, forming wide gaping crevasses. That on a glacier, crevasses never get more than 100 to 150 feet deep because of pressure. But those are the kind of depths you'll be seeing over there. That the ones that we've seen there range between about 50 and 100 feet deep.
The meltwater from Mendenhall Glacier eventually makes its way into Mendenhall Lake and Mendenhall River. These two bodies of water provide another recreational opportunity, rafting. The trip starts on the shore of Mendenhall Lake.
Get off the shore.
From here, you shove off for an exciting rafting adventure. For most of the trip, it's calm waters until you hit Mendenhall Rapids. The Mendenhall River empties into Gastineau Channel. The accumulation of silt has made passage in the channel impossible for all but the smallest of vessels. It has also created an area known as the Mendenhall State Game Refuge, a popular area for bird watching. the spectacular beauty of the inside passage is incomparable. This is Sockeye Falls. To see the rushing, foaming waters cascading over rocks polished by an ancient glacier is one of the wonders of Southeast Alaska. One path of this torrent leads to the ocean, but to follow it upstream, you come to the source. A small lake fed by the meltwaters of an offshoot of the Taku Glacier. The Taku Glacier is the largest glacier emanating from the Juneau Icefield. Located about 20 miles north-northeast of Juneau, this giant river of ice is 25 miles long and 5 miles wide. Scientists recently discovered that more than half of the length of the Taku Glacier rests below sea level. Seismic measurements revealed that the Taku in some places is over 4,000 feet thick, with the base of the glacier almost 2,000 feet below sea level. It is deeper and thicker than all other glaciers yet measured in the world, except polar glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica. While other glaciers flowing from the Juneau Icefield have been in decline, for most of the last 100 years, the Taku Glacier steadily advanced. Glaciologists say the glacier's most recent advance stopped around 1988, after the Taku surged forward nearly 4 miles, bulldozing the forest and everything else in its path. Researchers studying the glaciers of the Juneau Icefield attribute the advance to the huge quantities of snow the glacier receives in its accumulation zone. The accumulation zone is the area on a glacier where accumulation of snow and ice exceeds what it loses through melting. For the Taku Glacier, this area begins at a higher elevation in the coast mountains than other glaciers, such as the Mendenhall. So when it's snowing high on the Taku Glacier, it might be raining on the Mendenhall. Today, the Taku Glacier's position remains stable, with the glacier advancing and melting back at about the same rate. But scientists and researchers are keeping a close eye on this glacier. They want to know whether the Taku will one day continue its advance, eventually blocking the Taku River. This is a wild part of Southeast Alaska, a place undisturbed except by the grand forces of nature. Mountain goats are one of the few animals who find this rocky, ecologically young land a perfect habitat. These sure-footed climbers are superbly adapted for life along the steep mountainsides. They have powerful front quarters for climbing and hooves designed to grip the rocks. These goats spend their summers moving from one alpine area to another in search of mosses, lichens, grasses, and herbs. In the winter, they'll descend to lower elevations where finding food is easier. As the summer sun sets, the waters of Mendenhall Lake turn from gray to crimson and gold. A typical day is coming to an end. While the brief darkness of the Alaska summer will soon envelop the land, the mighty Mendenhall will not sleep. This Ice Age giant, night and day, continues as it has for thousands of years, working to shape the landscape. Today, Mendenhall Glacier is slowly melting back to the mountains of its birth. But one day, the cycle may reverse, and Mendenhall Glacier will renew its slow march toward the sea.